The magical loaf at Poppy's Bakery. In the heart of a cozy town nestled between rolling hills and a shimmering river, there stood a bakery unlike any other, Poppy's Bakery. The quaint little shop, with its ivy-covered walls and flower-filled window boxes, was beloved by everyone in town. From the moment the sun rose and the scent of freshly baked bread filled the air, people flocked to the bakery, eager to taste the delightful creations of the young baker, Lila. Lila had inherited the bakery from her grandmother, Poppy, who had passed down not just her recipes but also her love for baking. Poppy had always said that baking wasn't just about flour, sugar, and butter. It was about the love you poured into each loaf and pastry. And while Lila took that advice to heart, she had always suspected there was something a little extra magical about Poppy's recipes. One bright morning, as Lila prepared the dough for her famous honey wheat loaves, she noticed something strange. The dough was softer than usual, almost as if it had a life of its own. It seemed to pulse with a gentle glow, like sunlight reflecting off water. Lila blinked and rubbed her eyes, convinced she was just tired from waking up so early. But when she touched the dough, it felt warm. Not just from the oven's heat, but warm in a way that made her feel like she was holding a tiny beating heart in her hands. Curious, she carefully shaped the dough into a perfect loaf and placed it in the oven, keeping a close eye on it. The oven timer ticked down, and when the bell finally rang, Lila opened the door and gasped. The loaf was golden, but not just in color. It shimmered with a faint magical glow, as though it had been kissed by the sun itself. The aroma that filled the bakery was unlike anything she had ever smelled, sweet and comforting, with a hint of something mysterious, like cinnamon and stardust. Lila hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity got the best of her. She grabbed a knife and gently sliced into the loaf. As soon as the knife touched the bread, a burst of light filled the room and a tiny voice squeaked, "Finally! I'm free!" Startled, Lila dropped the knife and stepped back. From the loaf of bread, a tiny flour-dusted fairy emerged, fluttering her wings and shaking off breadcrumbs like they were confetti. The fairy was no bigger than a teacup, with sparkling eyes and wings that shimmered like sugar crystals. "I've been trapped in that dough for years," the fairy exclaimed, stretching her tiny arms. "And about time someone let me out. Oh, the things I've seen in there. Honestly, no one told me being a bread fairy would be so complicated." "A bread fairy?" Lila repeated, still in shock. "You mean you were inside the dough this whole time?" "That's right," said the fairy, her voice tiny but filled with mischief. "My name's Buttercup, and I was enchanted by your grandmother, Poppy. She baked me into a loaf years ago when I got into a bit of trouble, long story. But only a baker with true love for the craft could break the spell, and it looks like you're the one." Lila was speechless. A magical bread fairy? In her bakery? It was all too much to believe. Yet here Buttercup was, fluttering her wings and dusting herself off. "Now," said Buttercup, "as a reward for setting me free, I'll grant you 3 wishes. Anything your heart desires, as long as it's bakery related, of course. I can't go granting wishes about gold or castles or anything. Strictly baking business." Lila blinked, trying to process everything. 3 wishes?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anything to do with baking?" "That's the deal," Buttercup said with a grin. "So what'll it be? Endless flour? A magical oven that never burns anything? Name it." Lila thought for a moment, The bakery was already beloved by the townsfolk, but there were always ways to make it better. I wish, she said slowly, for the bakery to always be filled with happy customers who feel like they're at home when they walk through the door. Buttercup snapped her fingers, and with a flash the bakery's front door swung open. Instantly a stream of customers poured in, smiling and laughing as they lined up to buy their favorite pastries. The atmosphere inside the bakery felt warm and inviting, as if the very walls were welcoming everyone inside. Well, that's one wish down, Buttercup said, floating next to Lila. What's next? Lila glanced at the oven, where she often worried about burning her delicate pastries. For my second wish, I want my bread and pastries to never burn, no matter how long they stay in the oven. With another snap of her fingers, Buttercup granted the wish. Done! Now you could leave bread in there for hours, and it would still come out perfect. Lila smiled, already imagining how much smoother her mornings would be. But for her final wish she hesitated. She had everything she needed: a successful bakery, a community that loved her, and now even a bit of magic. What more could she ask for? Then it came to her. For my last wish, she said, I wish for the joy of baking to always stay in my heart, no matter what challenges I face. Buttercup paused, her mischievous grin softening into a warm smile. That's a beautiful wish, she said, her voice gentle, and easily granted. With a final snap of her fingers, a gentle warmth spread through Lila's chest, filling her with a deep sense of contentment. With a wink and a twirl, Buttercup disappeared into a puff of flour, leaving only a sprinkle of glitter behind. Lila stood in the now bustling bakery, a smile on her face as she watched her happy customers enjoy their treats. From that day forward, Poppy's bakery became even more magical. People came from far and wide to experience the warmth and joy that seemed to fill the air with every bite. And though no one ever saw Buttercup again, Lila knew that the magic of the bread fairy lived on in every loaf she baked.